This video is another part of a set of videos which we've called Making Effective Selections. As you can see by the subheading, we're going to take a look at the Lasso tool. Now I think it's fair to say that the Lasso tool has traditionally been one of the mainstay selection tools of Photoshop for quite some time. The Lasso tool has so many uses that it would be impossible to cover them all in one video. However, a lot of what we may have done traditionally with the Lasso tool is gradually changing over time as Photoshop introduces new tools. Much of the strategic editing work we now do in Adobe Camera Raw. But we also have content aware tools as well, and they're slowly taking over to some degree from what we would have done with the Lasso tool. And we're going to be looking at content aware a little bit later. What I think we can do here is take a look at one or two examples of using the Lasso tool as a patch. Now it's a little bit like patching a pair of jeans, a hole in the knee, or maybe just using a patch to cover up a stain. It's still a great tool to use and fairly quick and easy too. Now I've already selected the freehand lasso tool, as I sometimes call it, simply because we can make freehand shapes. Ctrl+D will remove that selection. This is a very simple image, but I've got the tail end of another bird way out of focus in the top left there, and I want to do something fairly quick and easily with that. So with the selection tool made, I'm going to make a selection down this side of the bird, because I'm going to use what I've just ring fenced there as a patch. What we can do is go to our selector mask and make the edge soft so that it drops nicely over the area we want to cover. And it doesn't matter if we make the patch bigger than we need. It sometimes is a good thing to do that because it gives us a bit of wiggle room to move it around and adjust it. So let's go up to Selector Mask at the center top of the screen here, or a little bit to the left, and we're going to put just a degree of feather into the edge. Remember, when you come into the Selector Mask properties, you've got a number of different ways you can view the selection we've just made. Most of the time I often choose black on white because I think that's the most effective when I'm just going to give the edge a fair degree of feather. I'm going to go up to about somewhere around 100 pixels, but it's not crucial. But I'm going to output to a selection and click OK. So when I open this up, it doesn't look a great deal different, but I can now copy what's within that selection along with its feathered edge to a new layer. Now we can do this the long way by going up to the top left of the screen, edit, copy, edit, paste, but probably one of the most useful shortcuts you'll ever find is Ctrl+J. Ctrl+J will either copy a layer, but if you've got a selection made, it will copy that selection to a new layer, as you can see if you look up at the top right. Now I can pick up my Move tool from the top left of the toolbox, and here's another little shortcut. Not essential you remember it, of course, but if you want to save going right the way over to the toolbox, if you just touch your Control key, you can see that the Lasso tool that I've got just to the back of the head of the bird, as I hold the tool, it temporarily changes it into the Move tool. So I could move that patch over this way and see just about where I think it's going to work best to cover up that black area. Now I don't have to do this in one go. I can move it about, and as you can see I'm encroaching over the beak, so if there was a need I could even refine my patch just a little bit. Let's assume that that's the position I want it. Now when I release my finger from the Control key, of course we're back to the Lasso tool, but I've got a problem here with the beak of the bird. But I think you're probably going to know how to deal with that, because quite a number of the videos we've seen so far, what we've done is apply a layer mask, and I think here we would do the same. Sometimes we don't need to do this, the patch will just fall nicely into place, but sometimes we have to do a little bit of work to assist it. It could be that if I chose to rotate that patch a little bit, I may avoid what I'm about to do, but let's do it anyway. So I'm going to go to my layers, bottom left, select the mask, there it is. Over on the left hand side I've got black as my foreground colour. I'm going to select a standard basic soft edge brush. I'm going to drop my flow rate down to about 10%, and I'm just going to gently mask over that little bit, and we've got our repair done. Now if you look very carefully, maybe there's a little area over here that I can see. So it's not a bad thing sometimes to just turn off the image underneath just to have a look. I don't know, it seems to me to be something a little bit different. It must be just a natural part of the background. I thought for a moment I had a straight edge, but when you think about it, I wasn't close enough to any straight edges. We seem to have a bit of a straight edge here, so perhaps we've copied that over. But of course if you wanted to do that, we would save this as a layered file perhaps, but as I'm happy with this, I'm going to flatten it, pick up my spot healing brush, and if I felt that little straight edge there was something I didn't like, well then I can touch it just once or twice and merge it into the background. But we've got a result quickly and simply with the Lasso tool. Here's another similar subject. So what we're going to do to get rid of this ugly stick in the background there is to create a patch from another part of the image. Sometimes if we've got a little highlight, as you can see here, if you're going to take a patch, sometimes it's a good idea to consider fixing the patch before you start, so that when you select your Lasso tool, I'm just going to sort of mimic the shape of that stick and do exactly the same as before. So what I need to do is to go up to my select and mask at the top left of the screen. I'm going to put my feather in there somewhere around 100. In fact, while we're doing this, why don't I just tick the box here to remember the settings, but I'm going to output to a selection. I'm going to hit Ctrl+J, hold my Control key, move that across to the right hand side. Now sometimes when we do this, not only do we get a bit of encroachment here, but we can also have a slight difference in density. If that's the case, most of the time if you bring up your levels, now you'll find the levels in your image menu at the top left of the screen. Ctrl+L will bring them on screen too. If you put your cursor in the center box at the bottom of the histogram and I tap downward, you can see if I click and hold I can make my patch lighter and darker. Let me take it back to where we started. So I can just tap down a little bit at a time until I feel I've got it blended in nicely if there was a slight difference in density, and I can OK that. But I can also quickly add the mask, use the brush in exactly the same way. Generally speaking, a nice big brush here just to blend it in, and once again within a few seconds we've got quite an ugly distraction dealt with. Now here's an image which I quite liked, the desolation of the image, that wide expanse of flat sand, one of those places where when the tide goes out it seems to go out forever, but the sky is a little bit bland. So I've opened up two images actually, because I found another image here, and what I'm going to do is quickly pick up that Lasso tool and make a lasso shape just around that sort of area. Once again I'll go to my select and mask to feather the edge. Now of course all we've got to say is OK to that. Now I can hit Ctrl+C, which is going to copy what's within that selection to my clipboard. Edit copy can be found up in the edit menu here. But now I'm going to flick back to the image I first opened, and we either go to edit paste or Ctrl+V. Now it's dropped my sky in the wrong place, but once again if I want to use that shortcut key, touch the Control key, the cursor changes to the move tool and I can move my sky into place. And as you can see there, it wouldn't take very much masking of this little bit of woodwork here up into the sky before we've got a pretty quick and easy repair there, and certainly a more interesting sky. Now, generally speaking, I would mask through that old tree stump manually using a layer mask, but perhaps I can suggest another way, given that the subject here is selections. If I just turn that sky off for a moment and I select my background layer, if I go to my magic wand tool, I think using we've got a setting of tolerance of 50 up there. I think I'll leave that because I think that's going to work. As you can see, as I click into the sky, I've got a good selection around the outer edge there. Now, when we zoom into that, of course, we know sometimes that the edge is not quite as good as we first think, but it doesn't look too bad to me. So what I'm going to do here is hit Ctrl+0. I'm going to go to my select and mask. I'm going to add just a 1 pixel of feather into the edge of that selection and OK that. And as you can see, I've output it as a selection, because if I now go back and turn on my sky and add a layer mask, you can see exactly what it's done. It's masked nicely around here. We'll deal with that top corner in a moment, and we've got a bit down here. That's not a problem. Let's just have a look at the business end to make sure we're happy. That looks pretty good to me. And of course, when we're working with masks, if we hold the Alt key and click, there we can see why we're getting that bit of sky coming through. Could have dealt with that in select and mask if I wanted to. Number of different ways, but I could just select white, push my flow rate up to 100% and just paint that out, because that is not a part of the mask I want, nor is that little bit there. But within a few seconds we'll find that he stalls, waiting to turn them all back on. We've got a result. Now, I literally could go on all day with examples like this, but maybe a couple more. I mean, this is pretty typical when you think about it. We don't have control on where the bird we're trying to photograph lands on the branch, and trust the bird to land right beside that broken bit. And that's forced us to have a highlight in the top left corner. But of course, we've got a lot of pixels on the right hand side that we can use, I think, to patch up the left. So let's do much the same again. Let's make a selection around this area. I'm going to take a bit of the wood as well and up the outside. You can see what I mean when I said earlier on that a lot of the selections that we make are actually quick and simple to create. But I will soften the edge of that. We'll use select and mask to do that. Let's push that up to somewhere around 100. I think that's going to meet our needs. And again, output to a selection here, because I need to do exactly the same. You can see a lot of repetition here. Ctrl+J will copy that patch to a new layer. Now I need to flip the patch over, but when I do, it's going to be slightly wrong, but we'll adjust that. So let's go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. So there's the patch, but of course we've got the wrong angle. So what we can do is perhaps bring up our free transform tool. Ctrl+T is a shortcut. Edit, free transform. So what I can do here is rotate that, move that into position, and we'd need to be a little bit careful here. We want to make sure we cover up all the offending parts up there. We want to make sure we've got no ghosting here to give away that we've been working. Hit the tick when I'm ready. I think for a moment there I thought I had some encroaching on the bird. I think my feather there is a little bit on the weak side. So I think if I was doing this again, I would give that a little more, or maybe I would move this down further. Maybe I would move it down to something like, I'm looking, while I'm moving this, I'm looking at this edge here, and you would probably zoom in to make sure we're not going to encroach on the bird. And if we do encroach on the bird, of course, what we do is we apply that mask again, black as our foreground color, basic brush, and we just erase a little bit. I'll take that flow rate at the top of the screen down to 10%. So I will just erase that a little bit, but once again we've got a result. We've got a little problem at the top left corner, but once we flatten this to finish, we can give that a touch with the spot healing brush, little mark there. We've got a result. Now one last example, because I could go on for some time. Here's one of the good things about using the tools like this in Photoshop. When we're out sometimes and we're framing up on an image like this, I couldn't get into a different position to shoot this. I either shot it as it is here, or I didn't shoot it at all. But of course, when you know what you can do with the selection tools in Photoshop, you take the shot, whereas in the past, and especially in film days, you may have looked through the viewfinder and no, I'll come back later when the animal's moved, and then when you do come back, there's no sign of the animal. But here we can actually fix this in exactly the same way that I've just described. Again, Lasso tool. We're going to take a patch from over this side. We've got to avoid those fingers, of course, but we can always mask them away if I pick up a little bit of them, because there's always a chance that when you feather the edge of your selection, you'll pick up just a ghost of something you didn't want, but the mask will deal with it fairly effectively. Select and mask. Well, we'll stay with 100 here and click OK. We've got a bit of a problem to deal with here. I'm going to hit Ctrl+J to copy that to a new layer. The problem we have here is this side of the tree is sharper than this side of the tree, because the depth of field is falling off around the corner. So we need to mimic that in a moment. So let's flip the patch over using our transform tools. So edit, transform, flip horizontal, holding the control key to bring up the move tool. I can bring this over this side. I'm going to need it to be in there somewhere, so I've got a bit of work to do here, but not a great deal. But we've got to mimic the softness beneath. Now you can see just a little bit of the softness, so maybe we can do that straight away. I'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. I mean, to be honest, that doesn't look too bad. Look, 9.6, that looks about right to me. So I'm going to actually just go with that. That side, if you look at that side, it's a little bit paler as well. So do I need to make my patch a little paler? Well, if I do, let's bring up those levels again. Remember, they're in the image menu. I could just put a cursor in there. If I hit my down arrow, it goes darker. If I hit my up arrow, it goes just a little bit lighter. So that may be what we want. Then we're going to put a mask on here, but now perhaps we can do this slightly differently. If we hold the Alt key and we click the mask is created, but it's created in black. And if you remember the principles of a layer mask, anything that's black makes that layer transparent, so you see through to the one below. So where we usually have a white mask and we paint black, here we've turned things around and we're going to have a black mask. Now I can pick up white as my foreground colour. I can pick up my brush. I'll push my flow rate up to 100% down the left hand side. Now I can paint that bit in. In fact, I'll drop it down to about 50% flow now, and to do that little bit there and that little bit there, and there we have another result. Now I think with the Lasso tool we could come up with 1001 examples of where we may use it. But I think in the end it's going to be down to your own thoughts and your own creativity. Now I find myself unable to resist one final demo. This animal, a red panda, was shot in a zoo. But we've got blatant evidence of that with the cut log that finishes at the top right. So we can use the Lasso tool pretty quickly and easily here. So selecting the tool, I'm just going to make a selection, and I'm going to overspill everything, because when you think about it, I need to copy this and move it up, but having the background in place isn't going to hurt at all. So all I need to do now is to go to Select and Mask. I can soften that a little bit. Don't think it needs quite 100, so we're around 50. Click OK. Ctrl+J will copy that, and I can move it up into position, and we've got a result straight away. What I'm going to do is just quickly flatten that. Now look at the animal's face. One of the eyes has picked up a bit of shadow here, so this eye looks a much brighter one than this one. So let's zoom in. Let me pick up that same tool, and I'm going to make a selection around the eye, and you can see how quick that selection was. Once again, select and mask from the top of the screen. Don't want very much here, probably a pixel or two at the maximum. They are less than 1 pixel. OK to that. I'm going to copy that eye to a new layer. You can see the selection there, Ctrl+J, and there you see the layout on the right hand side, and there's the eye. Doesn't look very impressive. What we're going to do is blend this layer with this one to try to brighten the eye on the right hand side, so we get a bit of balance between the two eyes. In the latest update from Photoshop 2019, when we drop down this window now and we mouse over any of these options, we actually get a preview. But to save a bit of time, I need to take you down to screen, because when I go onto screen you can see the difference in the eye. If you look at the eye for the moment, I've got the lighten screen. So if I select screen, you can see now that I've got both of those eyes more or less balanced. But the good thing is, the one on the left that we've just fixed maybe is a tiny bit brighter now than the one on the right. So all we need to do is to drop down the opacity of that layer just a little bit until we've got the perfect balance. And when we're happy, of course, we would flatten the image to finish. And while I was doing that work, I did notice that my patch just fell a little bit short at the top right with that piece of wood. But of course we don't have any problems here, do we, in just trimming a tiny little bit off? But we could fix that with all number of different ways, but that looks pretty good. I could even just bring that edge in a little bit. Look how my rule of thirds now is becoming a little bit tighter on the animal's face. So there we have the Lasso tool.